Thanks so much, John. Well, really, thanks to each of you and the New Canaan Society um, for having me. I've really been looking forward to this for a great time, and um, not only Paul in terms of the kind initial introduction, but it's great to connect with you virtually here. And thanks so much to both to Ed for that uh, beautiful prayer, and Peter for the kind introduction. I think each of those. I think a lot of the elements of what we've already spoken about will come back in terms of the themes that I'd like to discuss. So, and again, it's both Sid beforehand and each of you. It's been great to start a conversation. I look forward to digging into that, as well as Dr. Johnson and the English OED. I think, just to sort of set the stage, and I think along the lines of what Paul had alluded to, I would say our country has really been through a lot over the course of the last 9 months or so. And so when I originally started writing this book, there were some core themes that I had gone through over the prior years. But I think what's been interesting, just in kind of finalizing my manuscript this year, and also just watching as developments have transpired over more recent months, I think there's an interesting, for both better and for worse, there's an interesting convergence of the way the experiences I had overlap significantly with what we've been dealing with as a country. So I think, there are, I think in general, and Paul alluded to this as well. I'll just say broadly, my personal perspective is that there are really no right solutions, and so just some of the concepts I'm going to throw out there and ideas and personal experiences. I know each of us go through, although we have a lot of commonalities amongst this group, I know each of us have unique experiences. But I think the one sort of common element I know for just starting to get to know you and becoming closer with Paul over the last year or so is just the fact that faith is a central and primary source of both strength and, in some cases, survival. So I just think it'll be good to discuss the various perspectives, because again, I think a lot of things have converged and developed over the more recent period. So to just pick up on Paul's point about forgetting of politics, I think that's absolutely true. And the details of my story in all ways are not a political issue. I think let me just kind of set the stage in a slight correction to Ed's to Peter's introduction. But never in my life have I met any of the big names who are central to the drama at the national level. I've always been sort of a down on the ground working level person, and so although I may have 3 or 4 degrees of separation from people who are in the headlines, I kind of got swept up into a lot of this. So and I've, similar to this community here, I've found great support, particularly amongst people of faith, but basically supporters and colleagues and friends from both sides of the aisle in terms of totally separate from politics. And just for the people that are interested in kind of the technical specifics and the kind of, the in the weeds details. And again, as Paul mentioned, we met at Christian Legal Society, and I'll just to set the record, set the stage a little bit. Just this month, a couple of weeks ago, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals had a ruling that a lot of the things that happened to me, totally separate from politics, were actually illegal acts done more broadly. So I would just say, in terms of my story and what I describe in my book, it's not really anything specific to politics. I think for many of the sort of more technical and functional details of what happened is very similar to things that affect all of us. And so, for those of you who are in the legal realm, it's there's that case out in the Ninth Circuit is United States versus Mullen, and so I think it's an interesting case study. Mitch had mentioned the various challenges that he and his family have faced, and I think it kind of is another example of the overlap and the similarities of basically many of the challenges that I have had. And I'd concur with what Mitch mentioned in terms of how faith and the foundation has helped me personally and my family as well persevere through very, very troubling and difficult challenges. And I think, on a lot of levels, and I'll give some specifics as to some of my personal experiences, et cetera. But unfortunately, and I think, in stark contrast to NCS, division has become a defining characteristic amongst a lot of elements of our society. And I think, those who have been able to kind of rise above, whether it's, this innovative forum, it's I've done, like all of us, a lot of Zooms over recent months, much more than I ever imagined. But just this incredible group, and the way you've all come together, I think it's really a great source of strength. And I'm really appreciative of the how fortunate I am to join you here today. So I think in general there's a lot of different ways of dealing with challenges, and I personally, and I know each of you have found faith to be an essential source of strength. And so I was just in talking with Paul about some of the themes I'd like to discuss. One of the chapters in my book at the end kind of talks about some of the core principles, just on a on a day-to-day level, which have been really essential to me. And it's interesting just listening to the introductory comments from each of you. I think the first two principles are exactly along the lines of what each of you have been saying. So I'll kind of start off on that in that context. So the first principle that's been I've always found essential throughout my life is just the process of learning. And I say this both from a spiritual perspective, but really all, in a closely related context, all aspects of my career as well. And, like Paul mentioned, it was David Namo at Christian Legal Society who was indirectly kind enough to introduce us. And, actually in a separate conversation, David actually strongly recommended that I try to find Paul as well. So I'm fortunate that happened. But I think in terms of learning, I have increasingly, and I've always done this, but it's been a particular source of strength in the most recent several years, is just reading from the Bible each morning. And I just find it a great way to just start each day, and it's part of that same growth process and learning. And this is a special um, uh, associated aspect of that in terms of us coming together and sharing our faith and our respective stories. So, in terms of that, the same, on a general level, the principles, and in the introduction, uh, you know, Peter had mentioned my bunch of degrees I happen to pick up. The one thing I would say about that is I like to joke that my first degree after high school was U.S. Naval Academy, as you mentioned. But I like to joke that I actually dropped out, effectively dropped out of the Naval Academy about halfway through, when I started basically working part-time and while also continuing my studies. And I've always found, similar to each of your experience, um, the various synergies in terms of growth and both learning and growing in our faith and other aspects of our life, in conjunction with actually doing things at the same time. And it's been great to hear today some of the things that each of you have been focused and working on, and again, how those synergies occur. And actually, to that point, and it sort of and even my doctorate, I did sort of part-time while I was working as a investment banker over in Europe. So again, there's a lot of I found that to be a positive source of continued growth. But so it's actually to Paul's point about Chick-fil-A and those great videos. I one of my close colleagues, and similar to my meeting with Paul, someone who I met serendipitously, was actually very close with the founder of Chick-fil-A, Truett Cathy. And he was in many ways not only a close friend, but really a mentee of his. And I think, and that kind of ties into my second point. Not only again, this colleague and friend of mine, really as part of that lifetime of learning and part of the continual process of growth. I know he's built his own business in many ways, based on the same types of fundamental principles, in terms of building upon one's faith and really having it as a foundation of everything you do. But so in general, that kind of ties into sort of the second point I focus on in terms of my my story in my book, but in my concluding chapter. And that's really just one of surrounding yourself with people who are dedicated to service and to their faith, and in many ways similar values that you share. But I think in parallel with that, and also to Paul's other point about the sources of separation, I think in conjunction with that, I think it's important to not to stay connected with people from other aspects, or some other parts of society, and to have connections, particularly for people who might not necessarily share the elements of core values that I know many of us do. And so again, I have no friends in in high places. And so I think that kind of speaks to Paul's point of let's keep politics out of it today. But I think, one of the real reasons I've been excited to join you here is just the again, those same principles of having people who are, share the same values. And again, along the lines, I think, some of the things I see in NCS is very similar to Chick-fil-A and what Truett Cathy and his family created. So I know there's a great value to that. So one thing I think closely related, and sort of the third principle, which has been a real source of my strength, is understanding adversaries, or people that may not align with you, and not closing yourself off to those, some of the things that are driving them. So although someone may be an adversary, I think it's important to have empathy with those individuals. So, it's sort of a long story in terms of everything I've been through, but I think one example, and something that's been in the news over the course of the last month or so, is a gentleman at the FBI, a lawyer at the FBI named Kevin Kleinsmith. And unfortunately, he was charged in federal court in Washington, and actually entered a guilty plea. And I think similar to what I'm describing here, although he made some mistakes, I often pray for him, and I hope that again, there's ways of redemption. I hope, for a lot of reasons, not only on a personal level with him, even though I had dealt with him, and he definitely made mistakes. I think that foundation of faith and prayer, I hope, is a way of resolving some of the problems we've had. So, and I don't want to go on too long, but just a couple of final points. And one is, I talk, and it's a little bit. I mean, it's a plain English word, but it's one that's been in the news a lot, related to my story, is a question of candor, and some of the problems and the crimes that sort of put me in the spotlight is that various people who were taking actions against me did not always have candor. And just in even more plain English, it's just the principle of telling the truth. And I know there's so many verses within the Bible that speak of this, and I'll just mention a few, which is as in John 14:6, it's as Jesus said to him, I'm the way and the truth and the life, and really, truth is a fundamental aspect. And unfortunately, several of the people who were involved in these problems I've been up against did not focus on the truth. And so I think that's unfortunate, but I think there are kind of core ways of growing from that. And and again, similar to NCS and the fellowship that you have, one of the people I'm close with, he and I, every morning, we have a methodology, and reading several of the Psalms. And I'll just along these same lines, Psalm 5:6 says, you destroy those who speak lies, and the Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. And so I think it really is a fundamental principle. And it's been in terms of survival, sort of basing, my modus operandi and the way I've lived my life. Um, that's really, in a lot of ways, that when I've gone through the gauntlet, it's kept me out of hot water in many ways. And so, and there's this, like I say, there's one crime in particular that a lot of people have run up against, which is for the legal junkies, 18 USC 1001, which is false statements. And just a lot of the things, just, I've been in some really tough meetings with many people, with the, not only, 10 hours with the FBI, and then a day with the special counsel in Washington, and many hours testifying in front of Congress, and just basing things on those same principle in terms of candor and telling the truth has been really essential to survival. So, and then sort of the final one, and it actually ties back to and it speaks to the evolution that we've each gone through over the last several months since the pandemic broke. But when I was under a lot of pressure and I had to, in many cases, escape, one of the places I would sometimes hang out or camp out for several weeks was actually, I know, kind of close to the original New Canaan, up at the Doubletree in Norwalk, Connecticut, the hotel there. And so that, and often I would escape via my bike. I'd ride up Old Post Road there and camp out there for a week or so. And I find, at least on a personal level, that's been a great source of strength. And also, when you're working out, it's a great opportunity to reflect. And on the couple-hour bike ride up to from the city to Norwalk, it was a tremendous way of sort of building strength and reflecting on some of the same core principles that I hold as dear. So I don't know. I could. I know it's been a tremendous just the dialogue and the back and forth in the initial start of this conversation. There's a lot of different angles that I could jump into, but I've enjoyed speaking with Paul going back quite a while, but with each of you this morning. So rather than continue on with too long of a opening speech there, if it's okay with you, Paul, maybe I'd suggest that we start the conversation.
Carter, thank you so much, and thank you for both your military and your public service. That's quite a background, and as I think about it, I think about your educational background and your work background, and culminating in you being really, in some ways, the heart of what a lot of people would say is the secular world. With all the challenges that you've gone through, maybe you could share a little bit about your faith story. What brought you to faith, and what led you to Jesus in this process?
So I actually from kindergarten even into graduate school with a break at the Naval Academy, I actually went to Catholic schools growing up, and faith was always, both as a Catholic altar boy, but also as a going to 14 years of Catholic school with a slight break at the Naval Academy while I was studying there before going back to the Jesuit University of Georgetown as for my first master's degree. And and I think it sort of speaks to what I was referring to in terms of the connection, and having people of faith sort of associated with you in a structural context of growing up and throughout my the initial decade or so of my education. It was really essential in so many ways. And I, it's interesting, and I think it also speaks to the some of the same issues and challenges in terms of or the going through the crucible and going through a lot of tough times. I was blessed by having a number of Catholic nuns who were really very, very tough on me in many ways, but in a greatly loving and thoughtful way. And I think to be completely honest with you, I might not have always fully appreciated them when I was originally going through it, but I like to think when I finally did, my goal was achieved and I was able to go to the Naval Academy. I remembered the upper class midshipmen at Annapolis. Although they would, from 5 a.m. until lights out late at night. They particularly in the first summer, which is known as plebe summer. Although they definitely put a lot of pressure on me there. I used to joke and think that Sister Hubertine and some of the tougher Catholic school nuns who were part of my training and part of my growth, and a key driver in terms of initially beginning my in the early years of my journey of faith were really essential. And unfortunately, I think having gone through some really challenging areas, there has been although I grew up Catholic, very often, and this kind of speaks to the fellowship. I know there's people from many denominations here, but and it also speaks to the point I was making about knowing people and understanding people of different perspectives. I think I've been fortunate to so the gentleman who was close with Truett Cathy of Chick-fil-A is from a different denomination as well, and I've certainly grown a lot in terms of the fellowship, and not being too constrained in that context. So yeah, I hope that answered, but if there's any.
Well, I'm coming at it a little bit different way. I'm trying to speculate in my mind what life might have been like for you in the last 3 or 4 years. And I can imagine it was pretty tough, and that you were in some ways being tried and probably felt misused, maybe felt misheard, misunderstood, without ample chance to get what you thought was the full story across. And I just wonder, in that context, was your faith an important part of getting through that, or what got you through that period of time?
Yes, it was absolutely essential in every way. And I mean, the one thing I would highlight is the fact that, and I tried to touch on it briefly in my opening remarks, but and I like the example I finished off on in terms of escaping to the DoubleTree Hotel in Norwalk, Connecticut. Very often, there was isolation, and I really had to, in many cases, fight on my own. To the same point on candor and the truth. I think along the lines of what you're correctly alluding to, I was surrounded by precisely the opposite for many years, and unfortunately, to some extent, it continues to this day. And again, I think the principles of the Bible and my faith have been absolutely essential in terms of, again, going back to the concept of truth, as per that, as per the, the the chapter from John and Psalms, etc. That that really, truth is a essential essential foundation, and and different people have different perspectives, but I think being, having as much candor as possible and sort of, keeping those same foundations, I think is really has been essential for me and really helpful in terms of persevering and continuing in that process. And again, I think we each of us, I actually, and part of, like I was saying about workouts, and now that we're a little bit more isolated right now, yesterday was Constitution Day, and I watched a a 2.5 hour Zoom for with some legal scholars yesterday, kind of celebrating Constitution Day and thinking about some of the challenges we faced in our country, and some of the related court decisions and the process that goes along with that, and the the ongoing battles that are happening. And one of the examples that they mentioned is a series of court cases where there's different standards for churches in terms of social gathering, and some states and some jurisdictions prevent people from coming together and gathering in their congregation, whereas some businesses and more secular institutions are not held in those same under those same standards and constraints. And I mean, frankly, it did sort of remind me of things that I have gone through as well, in terms of, the inability. And I know we've all sort of faced a lot of challenges in that context, in terms of our respective churches, et cetera, and, being somewhat isolated. And so, it's always a balance. And it goes back to the sort of my two initial points in terms of learning and growing on your own, but also, surrounding people in your community, both in your church, but also people of faith in general, such as this incredible institution of NCS.
So when you think of the challenges you've gone through the last 3 or 4 years, did that serve to strengthen your faith, or did it cause you to question it?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely 100% strength. And there's I remember reading there was an old Harvard Business School article about the crucibles that some people go through in life. And, they sort of, they analyzed a lot of people and sort of personal stories and business stories. And I think there's different people respond differently to certain challenges in life. And, I've been fortunate that I have followed sort of the more positive model, where it's you grow from the experiences. And certainly the survival I've been able to, persevere through over the course, or over the course of the last several years, and everything I've gone through has been absolutely essential. And it's strengthened my faith in so many ways. And like the verses that I cited, right? Having been through very testing challenges with some really tough adversaries, and building upon the principles that I've held throughout my life, based in my faith. It really, it's sort of a lesson learned in a positive way. right? And it's helped further reinforce things that I've always believed. And again, I think there are two sides, and it's a virtuous circle, like I've been saying. And again, like the Truett Cathy and Chick-fil-A, and people he draws near. I think sometimes through challenges, when people are also dealing with challenges, you can be provide strength with each other. And so, and there was, again, I have no high level connections, but somebody over the last couple of weeks has been in the news and was facing some really difficult personal challenges and also health challenges as well. And just the connection with him, and sort of um, thinking through and working through these issues together, and praying together, and sort of um, trying to find solutions founded in our faith, has been a great source of strength. So I mean, it's another example of the virtuous cycle, where you learn from your challenges on the one hand, but then you also grow and can share it with other people, who not only those that share your faith and your values and your principles, but also the process of interacting with others who might not always share those values. And so I think the intellectual challenge of having a debate, and sometimes disagreeing, and in some cases, unfortunately, being put through the ringer of some of these challenges, those tests, and can be and when you apply your faith in terms of persevering and emerging from there, it only strengthens, as a case study, I guess you will, what does work. And so, I guess, long answer to your question, but absolutely, it's been essential. And I don't know how I could have possibly survived it, and without my faith as a foundation.
Thanks, Carter. We're getting a lot of questions that kind of deal with the divisiveness and the polarization of the current political environment, and people are being great. They're not asking about politics, but one of the questions is it's very easy for us to disagree, and in the heat of the moment, our disagreement with others can turn to contempt if we're not careful. I imagine you must have had that temptation, and maybe you've even fallen victim to it. How do you manage that? How have you tried to deal with the temptation, despite feeling misused and perhaps wrongly accused, stopping that transition from disagreement and articulation of your viewpoint to contempt of the other side, or contempt for others?
Well, it really goes to the core of, and this is sort of what I was trying to allude to in terms of my my interactions with the FBI, and frankly, we'll keep it apolitical, but certain members of Congress who've been pretty tough with me, as well as the special counsel's office, who I really spent a great deal of time, not only in the day in the courthouse in front of the grand jury, but in the weeks and months leading up to it. And again, so one thing I've which has been I attribute a lot of that that modus operandi to sort of the core principles of my faith, but very often, and I've tried having a sense of humor. And again, I think, and it goes back to directly to the point we were talking about at the very beginning of those two interrelated principles of learning on the one hand, but then surrounding yourself with people who are not only positive, but some people who might not have that. And I think overall, one way from a tactical standpoint that I've gone about it, and it's sort of the way I've lived my life in general, is to keep a sense of humor, right? And I think a lot of it goes back to faith in terms of what's important. And sometimes things that may seem very important, or various pressures you may be under, again, keeping the principles of the Bible in mind, you know, suddenly, and there are countless verses of, we don't have the time to go through now, but the principle of there is, uh, these things that are happening around us are not really what matters. There are greater principles, and if you stay true to your beliefs and the positive foundation, that can really go a long way. And one way I've tried to advance that, and I think to your point about the divisiveness in general, is just a sense of humor. And from the very beginning, I knew all the false allegations that were up, I was up against in the media, with a lot of people, including some of the ones that Ed had mentioned in the actually Peter had mentioned in the introduction, was I have a joking dialogue with a lot of media people as well, and try to, it's a way of just trying to put things in perspective. And it's consistent with what I'm alluding to, where a lot of these things and a lot of these challenges we have, and a lot of these debates we have on a national level, are not really as important as they may sometimes seem. And so I guess the bottom line is to not get caught up in these things. And again, I think finding higher meaning, not only in terms of your faith, but in general, more broadly, in terms of thinking through what's actually important in life, has been really essential to me. And to be honest with you, sometimes it works better than others, and sometimes, when you're having a conversation with either a member of Congress, or a senior person within the Department of Justice, or an FBI agent, or a TV host, some star TV host, even someone who was had a prominent show yesterday on CNN, without naming names. But those, even though sometimes you might have various disagreements, I think having a dialogue and keeping a sense of humor, and keeping perspective on things can really be a key driver. And in some ways, and similar to the gentleman I mentioned, who I in turn, with a couple, although I never met Truett Cathy, and I've been a Chick-fil-A, but I never met him. But growing through what you can learn from others in terms of this virtuous cycle between constant learning and surrounding yourself with people who both from a positive side, in terms of those that you share your values with, but those who may not share your values, and who you can then have a positive dialogue, even though others may try to allow that to sometimes spiral out of control. But so,
you touched on it a little bit just now in your last answer, but let me ask your advice. I mean, we're 2 months away from an election. The rhetoric is extreme on both sides, the divisiveness we've talked about. And it's really unsettling for me. I find it personally very difficult to have a rational discussion with members of my family, with friends, even with people here at NCS, without it just moving into way beyond what it should in terms of emotions and vitriol. And you know, it seems to me we're called to be in the world, but not of the world, but we're also called to seek unity with others and to be peacemakers. How do we navigate this? What advice do you have just for us as believers and men to navigate these next couple of months in our country and in this political season?
Well, I think, you know, and this goes back to my third point about don't hit too hard against your adversaries. And people who there's way out there, you know, I've talked about some virtuous cycles, but there's also a vicious cycle. And I think, you know, that's exactly what you're referring to there. And I believe in what has worked pretty well for me, although not perfectly, is, you know, staying connected with people who and having an open dialogue with people who you don't agree with and who you know might not be doing all the right things all the time. And again, I, you know, just again, I pray for him, and I feel in many ways bad about what happened in his case. But that same FBI lawyer, Mr. Kleinsmith, right? And you know, I mean, he's someone who I had, you know, I tried that. I tried having an open dialogue, you know, both with him and his other colleagues within the Bureau. And, you know, sometimes it doesn't work. But I think it's important, even though someone might not have your personal best interests in mind, I think there's a lot that can be done in general with remaining engaged, you know. And it was unfortunate in terms of that particular dialogue, but keeping people in your prayers and having a way of a more positive interaction, or at least as positive as possible, I think is really essential. And you know, the way people, you know, in the last presidential election, I like to joke around with people, and you know, and it's sort of a structural level of politics. And I guess there's three kind of core foundations, pillars of any political campaign. And you know, you could separate it out into policy, politics, and media. Those are the three. And you know, and very often the media related people, you know, although everyone in some ways interacts, I mean, they're separate silos. So the politics, the policy, and the media side. And I you know, throughout my career and those degrees that you know, that Peter had mentioned, you know, they were largely about policy, right? And I think sometimes you know, I think there are certain advantages, and I think this is, you know, my I guess my one recommendation is to keep it more focused on the policy side as opposed to the political, which by definition sometimes is a little tougher. And you know, as seen in some of those examples mentioned in terms of the media, those can be sometimes tougher and more divisive silos, if you will, both the politics and the media. And I think the more we remain focused on core policies, I believe, for a lot of reasons, not only in terms of making things more substantive as opposed to procedural, and more just functional in terms of the way these things happen in the world. I think the more we stay focused on policy and core principles, it just has huge advantages in many ways, including making it more, less divisive. I mean, yes, there are divisive aspects of policy, but I think, keeping it on a higher level is more productive and, can help drive things forward in a better way, I would suggest.
Someone wants to know if you did eat the cookies at the DoubleTree.
It's interesting. I did, and I, having escaped there for so many weeks, one of the ladies at the front desk there on the right, we had a good relationship, and she would actually, don't tell anyone at Hilton this, but she'd sometimes give me 2 cookies when I came in. So I particularly appreciated that.
I understand. Maybe you could talk about those and how you responded, or how you got the strength to respond to that.
You broke up for just 1 second. Would you mind repeating the question?
My understanding is you've had some death threats against you, and I'm wondering how that impacted your thinking and your faith and any other reactions to that experience.
Well, I actually touch on this a little bit in my book, and this sort of, it actually goes back to Mr. Kleinsmith as well, because not only did I tell the FBI about some of these problems, but I also mentioned it directly to the FBI lawyer, Mr. Kleinsmith. And unfortunately, it's kind of another example of what we're generally referring to in terms of, as I discussed, in terms of finding different sources of strength and faith, because in many ways, people were, when I didn't get much support from the authorities and I was hiding out in hotel rooms, it was challenging on the one hand, but again, I've always been a bit of a glass half full perspective type of person, and some of these challenges sort of makes you understand and think through what's really important to you. And so I actually did really grow, and I think in some ways, although it was very challenging, there were some silver linings to it. And I can mention it has been declassified by the government, by the intelligence community over the last couple months or so. But one of the things that came out, and speaking of the DoubleTree, is that the room I was staying in, the FBI had broken into my hotel room where I was staying. And so, I think it's easy to get cynical in terms of, there was absolutely no basis for them doing that, as now has been proven with a lot of investigations by all branches of government, the judiciary, the executive branch, and Congress, tons of investigations that have looked into these crimes. But although it was a terrible challenge, again, I think I was able to switch it. And what the Bible says in terms of what's important. And I mean, all these things are, in the grand scheme of things, are not as important and not as big of a deal as they might otherwise seem. So I think, keeping track of that, and keeping that in mind, I think is pretty essential.
You mentioned policy differences. When you think about what we're going through in our country today, some of what you've gone through, is it just politics and differences of policy, or could you argue that this is actually more than that? It's a spiritual battle.
Well, and again, I didn't want to some of the specifics, but I alluded to one of those, or several of those court cases which have been battled, and on many levels. And I think, a few have either already arrived at the Supreme Court, but also, are on their way in terms of certiorari motions in terms of getting in front of the Supreme Court. But there are, there's one big question in terms of coming together for church of where some of these things are not as, there is an overlap in terms of people trying to practice their faith, and so broader perspective. I think, and also engaging in a more positive dialogue, I think can be helpful in terms of finding ways through that. And again, it goes back to the concepts of candor and the truth, right? Because if we really, have the full information, if people in their pleadings in some of these court cases are honest in terms of the reasons why some churches are shut down while some big box stores are allowed to stay open with tons of people in it, when only 10 people are allowed in a church if they're allowed to be opened at all. So I think there's a lot of different angles to that, but again, going back to your question and the point about policy, thinking through that and basing it on facts and basing things on the truth, I think can eventually, I know we have a lot of cases still pending and working their way through the court system, but I think there's basing it on those core principles and on truthful pleadings and allowing people to know the full story can lead to better solutions over time, I hope.
And I only have one last question, and my apologies if you've touched on this already, but do you have a small group or one or two guys that you pray with, prayer partners that give you strength that you rely on, or anything like that in your life?
Yes, I absolutely do, and I mentioned the one gentleman who we share a couple of Psalm verses every morning, and that I think it's a great way, and it's terrific being with each of you at 7 a.m. I think the starting your day in this kind of a context and having a connection with people who can help you reinforce your faith and your strength in so many ways is it's certainly been essential to me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to join you as well today. So it's been great.
Carter, thank you so much. What a great morning. I really appreciate you sharing with us, and I hope that this experience was a little more relaxed and pleasant for you than maybe some of your network interviews. Thank you for joining us.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much as well. It's really great spending time with each of you.